What is up, C3 Public? It is so good to see you in week 2 of the semester. If you're here for the first time tonight and you just showed up at a random house because of an invite, I want to say welcome. And we say all the time at C3 that we're not a service that you attend, we're a family that you're a part of. And so I'm praying that you find family tonight. The title of my message tonight is this: Destined for Difference. Do you remember growing up being so concerned about fitting in? Maybe you didn't, but that was me. I can remember every part of my wardrobe being about what my friends were wearing, which led to a weird season of FUBU and South Pole for me, which we're just not going to talk about. But we've all been there, right? We've all been in situations where fitting in was all that we thought about. And I think if we're honest, there's still a part of that middle school version of us that gets out every once in a while. Every Instagram we post, maybe the clothes that we wear, we put them through this filter of what will they think and what will they say. And the world is constantly telling us what we're to look like and how we're called to act and what we're supposed to be, that being different is not acceptable and should not be aspired to. But tonight, I hope you hear me say this. You were destined for more than that. You were destined for more than a life lived for the approval of man. You were destined for more than always looking over your shoulder, wondering if you've met the mark. You're destined for difference. I read in a book recently where a pastor said this: don't stop trying, just stop trying out. Listen, C3, if you know Jesus, you don't have to try to impress. You don't have to try to measure up. You can stop trying out. You measure up because Jesus did all that you needed to measure up. So don't fall into this trap of being something different than your destiny. In fact, you were destined for difference. Peter writes about this when he encourages readers in the book of 1 Peter, specifically in chapter 2. We're going to be in verses 11 and 12 tonight. And in verse 11, he says this. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." And then verse 12, he says, "Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us." The first thing that we see him say to this church is that he's simply saying, you are foreigners and exiles. Your version may say something different. It may say sojourner or stranger, but for the sake of our talk tonight, let's just call them different. He's saying, first and foremost, listen, this world that you're living in, you're supposed to be strangers. You're supposed to stick out. Essentially, Peter is saying to the church here, he's saying, your lives are meant to be different. You aren't living the way that the world lives anymore. You're called to live different, to be strangers, to be set apart. And he talks about this earlier in chapter 2 when he talks to the people and he says, you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And C3, we cannot do that in this world without being different. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you're the new kid or you're a stranger? Maybe you visited a foreign country. I remember when I went to China my senior year of high school. I went with my, at the time, family of 4 and spent 17 days in China adopting my little brother. So just picture for a second 4 6-foot white people walking through the streets of Beijing. For sure different, for sure strangers. And every single night we would go out to eat and the menu it's in Mandarin and we can't read anything and we would struggle to Google voice text just anything that we could pronounce on the menu. And every single time it was a disaster. And there was no doubt that we were not from there. There was no doubt that we were different from the norm. Why? Because there's a noticeable difference when you're from out of town. There's a noticeable difference when you're a stranger in a foreign land. C3, listen, I think what Peter is saying here is that a relationship with Jesus comes with a destiny for difference. We're called out of the darkness to declare the praises of God. We stepped out of living for ourselves and we signed up to live for Him. A life destined for difference. So, what does this difference look like? I think Peter shares a couple of different things. The first thing is that we're different by what we avoid. He says, because you're foreigners, because you're exiles, because you're strangers, you're to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Peter is literally saying, because you're different, you abstain from your evil desires. Because you're a stranger, we give effort to be different. We fight against the things that wage war against our souls. Hear me out. Peter's not saying, hey, here's a list of rules, you better make sure you follow them. He's saying, you're different, so live like it. Because you're chosen, because you're royal, because you're God's special possession, don't live like you're anything other than that. You know, this summer I've been trying to read a lot, and I've been a bit of a book and history nerd. And one story that jumped out to me may help as an illustration here. I don't know if you know, or if you've heard of a guy named Napoleon. He's actually known as the short, 5'6" commander of the French army. But he's actually one of the greatest commanders ever. In fact, in all of history. And history says that Napoleon's greatest defeat was at a place called Waterloo in 1815. But what most people don't know is that Napoleon was actually winning that battle for most of the time. Napoleon led his men to amazingly outmaneuver his enemies, even though he was severely outnumbered. And back in those days, the enemies that he would face, they would have old British cannons. And these cannons were like muzzle-loading cannons. And so they'd be packed full with gunpowder and wadding. And they would basically put some sort of projectile in there, light it with a torch, and just launch it towards people. And so typically, in war, when an army would conquer past a certain enemy line, what they would do is they would take metal rods or nails and they would hammer them into the cannon hole, basically just destroying the cannon so that it couldn't be used again. But on this day at Waterloo, Napoleon watched as his men advanced past the cannons of the British army without even touching them. And history talks about how Napoleon's literally screaming towards his men don't forget to destroy the cannons. But they did. And soon, Wellington, the opposing general, and his men, they found their way back to the cannons and used the cannons that the men had forgotten to defeat them. It's one of Napoleon's greatest military losses. What that story, what that example shows me is if you don't take out the things that wage war against you, they may just be your downfall. We cannot forget, C3, to destroy the cannons in our lives. Part of being a believer is living out our God-given destiny, is taking out what we're called to take out. C3, I don't know what that is for you. Is that a pattern of your life where you're taking things out that don't reflect the heart of God? I'm not talking about a life of perfection, but a life of effort, seeking to avoid all that goes against the heart of God. Maybe it's that relationship that you're in, that you know supports your desires way more than God's. Maybe it's a habit that you have that you know you should drop, but you just haven't yet. Whatever it is, we're called to be different. And part of that difference means dropping what we know we aren't meant to carry. The second difference marker, though, that Peter mentions is this. He says, we are different by how we're noticed. He says this. He says, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Peter keeps going here. He's saying, listen, it's not enough to just abstain from sinful desires that wage war against you, but also living different on the inside should translate to making a difference on the outside. Essentially, what he's saying is if you're abstaining from your sinful desires, then you're also being noticed for your character by those around you. He says that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Peter, in this moment, is giving purpose to difference. He's saying, in your difference, in your noticeable different behavior, they will see. Well, who are they? They, for them, were the people that were persecuting them, the church. They, for us, is the people on our campus. It's our fraternity brothers, our sorority sisters. It's our neighbors at the apartment. It's our people. What he's saying here is he's saying, live lives not for their approval, but so they will see Jesus. Think of it this way. Will people thank God for my example that led them to Jesus? You see, we can't be seen as different if we don't live different. We are different by how we're noticed. C3, as you think about this semester, as you think about your life, what is noticeable? What good works are you known for? We have an opportunity in front of us, C3, one where we can be noticed. And as you sit at your house right now, whatever location you may be at, you are an army, destined for difference, destined to be different and make a difference for Christ. But you can only do that if you live as you're called, as God's chosen people, walking in the difference that he destined you for. And for some of you, that can't happen just yet, because Jesus has never shown you what real difference actually looks like. For you, that person, wherever you are tonight is your night. It's time to stop fitting in. It's time to hang up a life lived for others and pick up a life destined for difference. Jesus says in John 10:10, and I know I quote it all the time, but he says that he came to give us life and life to the full. And he did that by dying on the cross for me and for you, to cover our sins and to give us a life we could never have on our own through a relationship with him. And if you've never started that relationship, but you're interested and you want to tonight, here's what I want you to do. I want you to text me. I'm serious. Right now, text me. My number is 479-236-8692. Let me say it one more time. 479-236-8692. I want you to text me just your name. Just text me your name and I'll know what that means. But I want to celebrate with you all that God is stirring in your heart right now. But I also want to get you deeper connected to our C3 family. But I don't want you to stop there. I want you to be bold. I want you to talk to a Connect team member at your house tonight before you leave. If you don't know who that is, our host for the night, we'll make sure to point them out to you. And I'm so excited if that's you. God is starting something in you tonight that will last a lifetime. And we cannot wait to see all that God wants to do through you. For everyone at every house tonight, I want you to hear something. You were destined for a difference. What would it look like if all of our 10 locations committed to live out that sort of destiny? What if we all committed to live noticeable, sin-fighting lives for the kingdom and invite people to our houses like crazy? It sounds like a recipe for revival, a city looking more like Jesus than ever before. And I cannot wait for that. We'll see you next week.